we're looking at a public issue which we deferred from last year. So we've set for ourselves a journey, 10-year journey, and we would like to be numbered amongst the top 10 in terms of market capitalization in Sri Lanka.
Janashakthi Group is a diverse portfolio of businesses, including life insurance, investment banking, and finance and leasing business. A couple of years ago, the group reactivated its holding company structure by introducing shared services as a central unit, and that started a transformation in most of the holding businesses. In the studio with us today is Ramesh Schaffter, the CEO of Janashakthi Group, now also known as JXG. Ramesh, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start the conversation here. When you started JXG, when you set up a shared services unit to serve the group businesses, you had certain objectives in mind. What are the results of that transformation 2 years since you started?
Shamindra, necessity, they say, is the mother of invention. And the necessity that came about was the advent of COVID, individual business units being concerned about retrenchment of staff and such things. And so we were able to roll out something that had been in the back of our minds for many years. But because the business units were strong on their own, they were functioning, you don't need to break something and try to refix it. It wasn't broken. But then with COVID, everything changed. We had no sight of how long this crisis would go on. And so the businesses were all, shall I say, agreeable to setting up shared services on the basis that then we would not be retrenching staff. So we identified, with some period of study and with the use of external consultants, we identified the functions that could be centralized, the basis of charging or the basis of delivery of services so that the quality of work is not compromised. And so we rolled out about 8 months later, 10 months later, we rolled out shared services, went live, and it's been very successful.
Demystify shared services for us. What aspects of the back office do you mean by shared?
So you're familiar with the phrase stick to the knitting. And that essentially means stick to what you know, stick to your core business. In this case, we have used that phrase to mean that every business sticks to their core operational function, and everything else that may be considered a support service lands up with shared services. So what did we move? We moved legal, we moved HR, we moved IT, we moved finance, some aspects of it, we moved administration, and we're still moving some of the others like internal audit and compliance. What that really means is that there's a cost saving at each individual business level, and for the smaller businesses, getting a higher quality input. They would get the head of HR or the head of marketing, which they could never have afforded on their own, for just a fraction of the cost. So perhaps 15 or 20%, and they're getting the knowledge capital that comes from a very high standard of business heads.
Transformation, so change is very difficult for individuals and organizations, because organizations consist of people fundamentally, right? You got to move the people. Leadership will have to play a big role in making such a transformation possible, and you're dealing with several businesses that are not necessarily in complementary areas. They're fairly, in every sense, they're diverse. How did the leadership work to make this possible?
So the first thing is we've been bestowed or put in place 3 very good, strong CEOs at business unit level. And without that, any change of this magnitude is impossible. Not difficult, impossible. So first there was their buy-in. And with that buy-in came them rolling it out to the individual business units, saying, this is the way forward, this is what we need to do to survive, this is what we need to do to become leaner and face the challenges of the future. So with that support and help, then the next step came onto my plate, working that, making it happen, making the billing systems happen, making the staff who were coming on to an unknown parent because the parent had always existed but had been so quiet in the background, most people didn't realize it. So they think I got a new job title as MD CEO, but I was MD CEO of the group for many years. Just that there was so little happening in terms of public profile of the group that people did not quite understand it. So what happens now? About 80 to 90 people got transferred into shared services, which functions as a contractor. It's still not fine-tuned the delivery of services, but everything's happening. It's happening well. We've overcome some of the culture issues. We have work to be done. We embrace common values, and we've spent time and money and effort inculcating those values across the board. And then that helps to build culture. And you need to build a common culture. Otherwise, there are clashes of cultures. And it's a process. One of the things we did on the HR front in particular is we get evaluated by Great Place to Work. And a year and a half ago, our scores were 2-3 companies were below 70. Now, this year, every company was above 80. Excellent move. And that shows that things are working. It shows that employees are satisfied. It shows that there is some collaboration taking place. It shows that there is joy in coming to work. And of course, now they're returning back physically to work. And that's where the opportunity is to build the culture you want.
I suppose the objective was from bringing a shared services unit together. You add them all, everything together, and then you got to look at how this can be a multiplier for the group and for those businesses. How is that going to transpire? How is that going to happen in your view right now?
In our vision and in our broader simplistic view of this, and yes, we do have, when it comes to operationalizing things, there are always challenges. But the way we view it is, we're a group that is not going to stand still. If nothing else, we're an exciting group that wants to have exponential growth. We will look at organic growth. We will also look at inorganic growth. So for me, with any acquisition that we look at, and right now we're back again on the merger trail, we're looking at acquisitions. We put a pause to it a year ago. Any acquisition becomes then a plug and play, because all of these support services at the standard that we want, with the values that we want, become a plug and play to any company we take over. So then that business unit just needs to focus on their core business. They don't need to worry about HR practices. They don't need to worry about administration. We're moving to common procurement. We're still not implemented that fully, but that's a key area that we're focusing on in this year. So it becomes a plug and play model, because you can scale up your shared services very easily, because you have the leadership, you have the business unit partners. If there's a new business coming in, we just need to identify or transfer or allocate a business unit partner. And we believe that's where the speed and agility of the group will come. That we would be very easily and very quickly be able to assimilate a new acquisition or a new business unit into the culture and values and standard of operating of the group.
It's interesting that you should mention acquisitions and also mergers. So you're probably looking for opportunities in businesses that you're already in versus diversified ones?
So we have actually, as a group, 2 years ago, with much discussion and market research, identified certain pillars. As a group, we would be in between 4 and 6 pillars. 4 would be ideal, 6 would be the maximum. We have identified, and that's to diversify away from being just a financial services conglomerate. That does not mean that financial services will not be an area of expansion. That's an area of expansion where conversations are taking place even today. And there is a lot, because we're in the entire range of financial services other than retail banking. With the other sectors, we are in conversation. We want to be in exports. We'd like to be in FMCG. Tech is an area that is a huge market out there, huge world out there, and we're not averse to it. But we need to find our sweet spot, because it's not an area where we have inherent strengths. So we need to figure out where in that space. It's a huge space. The market is huge, the industry is huge, the niches themselves are huge in the Sri Lankan context. And we need to identify carefully what strengths we have and what we bring to the table.
You mentioned how important culture was and that it was a process to get your culture to a place that you are satisfied with, right? Can you talk to us about that journey? How do you create that nurturing culture that also sort of fosters innovation, entrepreneurship broadly within the group as diverse?
So, what we'd like to say is it's down to leadership, leadership, and leadership. If the leadership does not empower people, if it doesn't create an environment where you can flourish, we don't believe that people actually maximize their capability. I believe, and that's a personal belief and an organizational belief, that we don't lack in talent. We lack in empowering people to utilize that talent. So that's a culture that we want to build. And culture is also a dynamic thing. It's something that keeps changing. And what we've tried to do, the first thing is to align cultures. And how do you align cultures? You articulate your values, and everyone who comes in, and now we have an induction across the group, there's a common induction process. And in that induction process, every newcomer is told, these are our values. Our values are cast in stone. They're not something that we can compromise on. They're non-negotiable. This is what you need to subscribe to. And if you fail to, then there's a mismatch. There's a disconnect. So those values are being inculcated. In fact, we're giving awards for value for people who actually practice and live out those values best. Departmental awards, individual awards, group-wide. The next is the culture. Culture takes a little more time. It stems from the values, but also there's a culture of how you interact with people, so respect is a value, but how does it actually play out? And there can be a difficulty in getting it to filter down the line. Respect is something we're culturally used to giving our seniors. Elders are respected by children, bosses respected by subordinate. But respect is actually about mutual respect. Equally, an adult is supposed to respect children. Equally, a boss is supposed to respect their subordinates. And that is where we have to work on a cultural shift, culture which is impacted by the external environment in this country as well. And so I know the tea girl in office because I work on respecting the tea girl. And so I address the tea girl by name. And I think that is, I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm so great, but I think that's important. Every person should know each other's name and be able to talk to them with respect, treat them with respect, give them a hearing where it's necessary, and more than anything, empower people to do things as best as they see how to do it. Because if you give them an opportunity, they'll probably do it better than you would. And I think that's where we lack. We have foot soldiers without actually empowering them to carry out. And my style and the style that we try to bring into the organization is, here's what we need done, go and get it done. I'm not going to spoon feed you on how to do it. You are taken in because you have some intelligence, you have some background, education, experience, etc. Go and do it. If you have a problem, come and tell me.
You talked about the attractiveness of diversifying into a technology-led business as one that's attractive. Also, look at how you can potentially deploy technology within the group as at the holding company and in subsidiaries as a way of gaining a competitive advantage. How is that something that's in the focus of the things you want to achieve in this structure?
So we've been at the forefront of embracing technology. So when we started insurance, we were the first to use Windows-based software. We were printing out policies in 15 minutes where the competition was taking an hour to type it up and things like that. But those days are gone. So how do you stay ahead of that game? And we want to stay ahead of that game. There's two ways. One is you embrace technology that's out there. The second is you create the technology. Using the tools that are available, you create the technology. So we are now in the process where we're actually trying to set up a fintech development arm that would develop, using these tools, develop cutting edge technology that would put us ahead of the game, ahead of the other players, give us competitive advantage. So there's the basic things we already run, in the sense that we run agent's virtual office, which runs on a tab. And so the agent can come and see you and access the mainframe or main server and give you any information they need to give you and such things. Then there's all the usual apps, and Janashakthi Insurance's app was actually awarded a best app and things like that. But that's the game that everyone's playing. So we are developing things on the First Capital front across their range of financial services, where you can manage your wealth in the palm of your hand, make the decisions that you want to, but also access the information you want to. The big thing that's being talked about today is neobanking, and we're looking at that. We're looking at what can we do in terms of the technology to come and in delivering services which are free of brick and mortar. But that doesn't mean that brick and mortar loses its place. We are very much looking at our own footprint. How do we maximize the footprint? How do we collaborate? Because Janashakthi Insurance, for example, has 75 offices and First Capital has 5. But here are 75 locations which you can collaborate on and such things. And that's where I think the synergies really kick in from being, you asked the question multiplier. That's where the multiplication comes, where one office is used by 3 different business units and multiplying the reach that each of them can have. And so with technology, we're in the process of carving out our developers and focusing more on what we're developing so that for each of these business units and future business units, we will be ahead of the tech game. We also want to see, can this be packaged and sold to others? Then there's also the question of overseas expansion that we have been keeping our eye on. And of course, the dollar was not cooperating with us. But we haven't lost sight of that. And when we do so, we want to be able to take not just manpower or knowledge capital, we want to take that fintech power as well. And Sri Lanka is quite good in that field, as you know. We don't lack in terms of people who are able to develop tech. We have 1 or 2 companies, or more than 1 or 2 companies, that are actually making their mark in the world. And why not? We don't lack in talent. And I'm a firm believer that Sri Lanka has, maybe not in the tens of thousands that India has, but Sri Lanka has the talent required to establish itself in many of these industries. And so we're looking at the tech space as well.
Ramesh Schaffter, always a pleasure. Thank you for
Shamendra.
joining us.
Good to be here.